The Truth in His Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. Thank you for tuning into my conversations at the intersection of arts, culture, and community. Today, I've got a good one. Got an interview with a guest who is an award-winning cultural anthropologist, visual artist, and curator whose multifaceted work in public art and community building has made him a respected leader in Washington, D.C.'s creative scene. Please welcome Corey Lee Stowers. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, man. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. Thank you for making the time. And it's funny, like, as you were mentioning earlier before we got into this, running into another like Lee middle name guy, it's a thing. It's a thing. I'm happy about it. It's like we connect. I do this thing when I'm interviewing folks. If they're wearing glasses, I always point that out.
Mm-hmm. I took mine off.
So yeah, it was something. So as we get started in the sort of introductory question, I find like a lot of times when we do that first like sort of introduction, it's something that's left out. It's something that's missing. And, part of what I aim to do is to get that extra layer from a person. So I want to give you the space and opportunity to introduce yourself, because I find like the artist statement, the online bio, always something that's missing. So if you will, could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your work?
Sure. My name is Corey Lee Stowers. We did. But I did catch a question. I know what you're asking. Corey Lee Stowers. I'm originally from Hyattsville, Maryland, in PG County. That's where I grew up. That's where I started writing graffiti and getting involved in graffiti culture. Very soon after to jump on the Green Line and start spending most of my evenings on U Street, primarily at Kappa House, which was a very well-known dance hall in the late 1990s. I ended up working at Kappa House as a promotions manager and as a booker, being around folks like the Freestyle Union. That would be like Tony Blackman, Priest the Nomad, Storm the Unpredictable. Of course, getting kind of integrated into the DC hip hop scene through that space. We ended up promoting parties there, Tuesday night open mic hip hop, Power Moves Party, which was really big, 98 into 2001 before Kappa House closed, and kind of sent me on this trajectory of working within the kind of cultural community, curating not only live events, but also art shows, teaching graffiti classes with a number of nonprofit organizations like the Midnight Forum, Metro Teenage. That landed me a 7-year stint as the art director of Words, Beats, and Life. And that kind of tracked me into creating public murals, which we were already kind of doing as graffiti artists, doing what we call street productions, which is less about like doing community work and more like our community coming together and creating work together. But it did segue into us creating public murals. Throughout that whole time, creating music, writing, primarily about graffiti culture and street culture in DC, and really just kind of giving me this basis of knowledge and connection with a large group of people and creatives in Washington DC that become my family over the years. And at any point in time during the year, I'll be doing projects either with the muralist or with recording artists or with organizations in order to help promote those communities.
Thank you. It's a great introduction in giving us a taste of what this background and what your work has been about in an abbreviated way. So thank you for that, because it's a lot. When you start mentioning, back in this time.
Yeah, we could get into the weeds with it. I mean, we could spend a whole year talking about Kappa House, but I know we have a limited amount of time here, so we want to make sure that we can space it out. So
I want to go into this sort of next piece, because I think I did this interview yesterday actually, and me and the guest, we both do something very similar. We interview creative folks, and I'm a little bit more self-deprecating about it. I say that I interview people more talented than I am, and I kind of steal from their story a little bit. Say, this is great to reference the great Corey Stowers. I'll start doing that. talk a bit about some of your creative role models. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone that's in DC or someone that's in the graffiti world or even in the music world, but someone that you're getting something out of that's kind of like help, send you on your trajectory or how you go about what you do. What do you admire about that those role models?
I would say creatively, my initial artistic kind of expression is graffiti. So many of my early role models are graffiti artists. Looking up to people like Cool Disco Dan, when I was growing up because his name was all around me, or gravitating towards, my initial graffiti mentor, Certs, because his name was so prominent along the red line, and on to other kind of style mentors like SMK or Mesk. These are folks that helped shape me as a graffiti artist. At the same time, I was really starting to come into my own and gravitate towards music that I appreciated more for myself. Some of the initial influences for me picking up, the pen and starting to write songs where Nina Simone was a huge influence, and being kind of brought into her world really started to make me think about like how I could, bring my thoughts out. KRS-One is another one, an artist who, upon receiving the work and really kind of like sitting with it, was a huge influence in what I do. Outside of that, I look at writers like really anthropologists like Martha Cooper, Henry Chalfant, who are responsible for documenting some of the earliest graffiti. And these are all spheres where I've spent my time and energy in over the last 2 decades. And these folks were right there at my formation, and so they became my instantaneous influences. Most graffiti writers don't also write books, and they don't also like document and present the way that I do. And so like I feel like I got a little bit of both sides of that equation when I was initially coming in and being introduced to the culture, because not only was there this, yes, we're practicing it, but we're also preserving it in this way also. And we're doing it in tandem. And so that's been kind of like a guiding philosophy for me, where I kind of like took bits and pieces from these folks and then started to combine them into the way that I'm presenting myself artistically or from a scholarly perspective. When I'm doing my writings or putting together the exhibits, it's always really kind of centered in that first initial experience. And my partner and I, we often go back and forth with each other, and this is something that I believe was said by Basquiat, which was I'm doing what would make 16-year-old me proud.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to take that back. I don't think it's Basquiat. Now I'm losing who said it. But ideally is like, whatever you're doing, would 16-year-olds you think it's cool? And I kind of go into those kind of spaces where I'm thinking, now I'm 45, going into 46, and what does 16-year-old Corey think about 46-year-old Corey? And I would have to say that he would be pretty stoked that he's doing the things that he's doing now. But that's always a question when we're talking about influences, and then how that kind of plays out. I think about it the same way. Like, what would KRS-One think if he heard my music, or what would Nina Simone think if she heard my music? Like I kind of think about those things, and I always kind of push things through a lens like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a few instances where, people have asked me, and it's in this vein, so it has me thinking about it. People have asked me just, when I do interviews, like, who's your dream interview? Who is the person you want to interview? And I'm always like looking for like, anyone that has something like that's an interesting thing that's just kind of out of the norm. It's like, that's interesting. That's a weird process. But there are a few instances where I've interviewed someone that's like, all right, I'm fanboying out a little bit right now. I need to scale it back. And it's coming from that position of, would they like these questions? Would they like how I'm approaching this interview? Would they like what the sentiment of what I'm doing in this whole sort of, I dare to say, body of work? And a lot of times they get it, and I feel like I'm in the right direction, but I'm almost waiting for that left hook, that counter left hook that I'm not expecting. Like, damn, they hate it. They're like, you can do better.
Right.
But it is sort of, yeah, I think I did this interview probably 2 years ago with artist writer Rafi Perez, and in the process of coming up with questions, I reference his book a lot. And he paid me the compliment. And I told him, I was like, dude, I reference your book. He was like, I think you're pushing it to that next stage. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like I melted on the podcast. I was like, wow, this is amazing. This feels really good. So having that moment and having that those sort of opportunities and even aspiring for those opportunities because they're an influence, that's a lot.
Yeah. And for me, it's about, I always look at the people that came before me in the spaces and fields that I'm operating in, and wanting to know that they feel good about like what I'm doing, particularly when it comes to representing like history. You know what I'm saying? Because certain things that I write about, I wasn't there for it. Obviously, I couldn't have been, but like getting feedback from people who were in and around those spaces who can give me that kind of direct feedback and being like, no, I think you're really on the right path with what you're doing. That is the feedback that keeps me going, and knowing that that the people that I'm writing about and writing for support what I'm doing.
So in that, let's talk a bit about some of the challenges of what you're working in, whether it be from purely the creative side or even the scholarly side. But I want to hear about some of the challenges because I see different projects and different organizations that you've been a part of and you've kind of led the direction of. But what have been some of the challenges and some of the rewards? You can either go in a very specific example or even a more broad and macro example, because I think there's a sort
Sure.
of.
And I think so you were asking about some of the challenges in the work, and you did specifically reference in the written questions just like the challenges between leading DC Murals and Art Block DC, because they have, kind of, even though there's some overlap and where those missions may meet, there is definitely distinct tracks for them. And I would say this, when I started Art Block DC in 2018, it was really about putting together an advocacy organization for the artists that I had been working with. A lot of them were muralists and graffiti artists trying to break into, kind of commercial work. And what we were seeing is that there was a lot of attention being drawn towards the street art murals. However, we also saw that there was a lot of spaces where the artists weren't really being properly compensated. They weren't, being given the support they needed to produce projects. And then there was also this whole hurdle of trying to track down funding and apply for grants and things like that. And so that was all a very, very new experience for many of the artists and for myself included. So I approached that in a way where I'm going to learn the system and then I'm going to, as best as possible, share this information and work with these artists as a group so that we can produce, projects that, that could be grant funded, that would have public significance. And that was the other huge part about Art Block DC, because I saw so many new pieces of art going up into communities that were non-contextual, that were kind of changing visually the identity of spaces, and it really didn't fit in with the narrative of what those spaces had been. And so we wanted to try to create a group that was going to combat that. And we did for the first few years that we were up and running. We created a ton of murals, worked with dozens of artists, and most of those artists now are independently working in the city, having kind of learned and navigated that system, and become, independent, of the group, while the group brings in new people and kind of continues to do that work. On the other hand, DC Murals, which was an archiving project founded in 1997 by one of my mentors, Dr. Perry Frank, was strictly just about documenting and archiving the public artwork in DC, and um, to with the work for DC murals, it has always been really a labor of love. It was for Dr. Frank. She started the organization with no funding. It wasn't even an organization back then. It was just a project, that she paid for out of her own pocketbook, and paid photographers to take photographs. Rented out spaces to do exhibitions and panel discussions with the artists. And I met her along my journey while I was out painting, on the streets essentially, and realized that what she was doing was super important. As I was doing it with the graffiti, she was doing it with the murals. And so over the years, she would come to me for design, her design work and things of that nature. And 2017, she officially asked me to join as a auxiliary member of the organization. I became the associate director in 2018, and then in 2021, when she decided to step down because of health reasons, I was named the executive director. So I say all that, and I tell a lot of people I inherited the organization essentially because there was nobody there to take on the work, and if I hadn't stepped in, the work that Dr. Frank had been doing for the last 25 years might have just gone away. And it was hugely important to me that didn't happen. And that's a sentiment that, that's a sentiment that kind of like crosses my work, particularly when we talk about honoring the older artists and graffiti artists, because for the very same reason, their stories could easily slip away, if nobody's there to preserve them or to put into context for people why it's important, right? So back to you, which is, what are some of the challenges, that we faced, and with both of those groups, I'd say one of the biggest challenges that I often run into is funding, right? Like we're constantly looking for ways that we can continue the work, whether it's, through finding funding to do a mural with the organization, or if it's finding funding to, continue archiving, to again, one of the biggest, issues facing the work is funding. And a lot of times it's just because you're going to have to go look for it. If you're not generating revenue based off of the stuff that you're doing, you're really dependent on public, donations or some sort of funding that's coming from the government, and either of which require, a lot of work to generate and keep going. And so what I find, is most difficult is just making sure that there's enough to go around. And as we move forward, what I see for us as being a solution to that, or at least something that's very helpful, is almost like the merging of the missions between the two. While DC Murals currently is a 501c3, we're looking at kind of redirecting it as a social enterprise, which will allow us to do much of the same things we're doing with Art Block under the same banner, and give us a little bit more traction in terms of, from an organizational perspective, to be able to continue to do the work that we've been doing. The last couple of years have been pretty great. We've had some amazing projects, amazing partnerships with, Martin Luther King Memorial Library, Phillips Collection, the creation of the 14th Street Graffiti Museum, and 16th Street Heights. And so we've seen interest in what we're doing. And so really now what it's about is about streamlining it. A lot of times it feels like I'm a team of one, even though I have a lot of folks around me that I can tap into. But as we move forward, we're really looking to build a robust organization, something that can stand alone, and will not have the same issues like when it's time for me to step off and do my thing, that the work just goes away. So we're really focused right now on the building of institutional structure and institutional knowledge, so that those things can be passed on to the next energetic bunch when it's time.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And thank you. Because, you touched on, you think about these challenges, you touched on sort of the funding thing. And there's an anthropological bent to what I'm doing here and crossing multiple communities at this point, but it's always sort of that. And it's, from my standpoint, I don't know if it's the same, but from my standpoint, when you're encountering or when I'm encountering sort of potential funders, potential partners, I said partners, so it sounds really, really weird, but potential partners, it's trying to align sort of what their values are with what I'm doing or what my aspirational thing is. And there have been times where I've been told, I'll read over it, I'll see the alignment, and I can make that sort of case, but then sort of the alignment's not the public alignment. It's like, oh well, can we kind of direct you maybe to these sort of interviews, or maybe you should do this, or maybe you should not. And I was just like, I don't want any input in that way. Like, if you like the work and the work aligns, let's not try to have this next stage, because then it's almost sort of so you guys are now a producer now, or something of that. And it's almost someone telling you what the work that you're doing, who, let's say I'm talking to, or who I'm interested in pursuing, suddenly that's not good. It's like, what is the value? What is the alignment? And the money component, the funding component is always somehow around that. I have a few that I'm encountering currently, so definitely that's top of mind. And it's always the thing. It's never quite enough to really fully realize or get close to what that vision might be. So, and this kind of aligns with this next question. So, I want to expand it a little bit. So, talk about the thought process as it comes to creating work. I know that that's one side of it, and as broadly as that might be, but then also sort of like initiatives through the organizations, like, okay, I think we should do this and work in this way. And then I asked that because, I'm already thinking of the episodes of 2025 right now. I had a meeting about that earlier, and thinking about, like, all right, who's going to fund this? Who are the partners to reach out to? How can I make X, Y, and Z happen? What are the episodes and things of that nature? I'm already starting that sort of preparation and incubation, and even that verification. So let's talk a bit about that, the sort of process of getting to the work.
So a process that has kind of emerged for me. I don't want to say that I've ever been in and been like, this is how I'm doing things like front to back. It's kind of like an evolving thing, right? But what I have been doing for the last couple of years is harnessing ideas, like the ideas that I might pop into my head, like, when we wrote the grant for the Aerosol show that we did with MLK Library, I wanted to have a conversation about the connection between graffiti writing and public murals, and how, in contemporary culture, one has directly informed the other. And have this conversation, person to person a lot when I'm talking to folks, when they point out to me, how much they love, the murals that they're seeing around the city, most of which are painted by graffiti artists. And then in the same breath, they'll point over to like a trash can or something and be like, oh, but I don't like that. And I have to oftentimes, attempt to educate folks and be like, well, without that tag on the trash can, you don't get the artist that eventually creates this, right? Because that's all a process, for the artist to go through to get to a space where they're actually ready to create something that's community facing, right? And that's not of the ego, right? There's a whole process that has to happen. And so the idea for that show, for the Aerosol show, came from conversations that I was having. And I was like, well, if I could put together something that shows people, like, in kind of like a timeline form, how graffiti art got to DC, what that original graffiti art kind of looked like, and then how those artists then informed, how public murals would look within 10 or 15 years, then we would really have something, solid that could, educate people to what's happened here over the last 30 years. And that became an idea, right? That idea needed to have funding. It needed to have the right space. It needed to have the right audience. And so we started looking around for opportunities to write a grant. Humanities DC is an amazing organization here in DC, and we found a receptive ear with them. Again, you're spending time, writing grant proposals and applications and things like that, but try to find the right fit. But even within that, I think that a lot of times it's about finding interested, partners within the community. For us, MLK Library was like a no-brainer for us because they have already the People's Archive there. They're invested in cultural history such as like punk and go-go. And so when we brought this project to them, they gave us the immediate thumbs up that we would be able to do work with them. And in that way, like, is kind of been like the evolving process. I'll come up with the idea, and then I will think, where does this fit, in the community, and then I'll go there and I'll advocate for us to be present in those spaces.
It's great. I think, listening to that, folks who just want to get an idea of like, what does that approach look like? As I'm listening to it, I'm like, all right, taking these notes, I'm going to adjust my process and how I go about connecting to these folks and advocating for a particular thing. And yeah, it's like, where's the need? How do we put it out there? How do we align with the folks? And sometimes there are folks that, in our organizations that you have that alignment with. Like, I've been to the library. I like the library. When you mentioned, the archive, I was like, I reached out to them. I would love to, so it definitely, the alignment is there. And it's these other elements, I think, that make up the pieces of culture that are in DC, whether it be from the visual language with like sort of the murals and, for lack of a better term, sort of the street art, and then sort of the sounds that are there and the history that are there. That all makes sense together.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, I've done a lot of teaching over the years, and a lot of times when I'm brought into a space, I'm being brought in to do something that's like, street art or graffiti related or mural related. And a lot of the teachers are like, oh, the kids all love your class. They just want to be in your class. And I was like, yeah, I got it a little bit easy. Graffiti's, an easy thing to get over with the kids. But as I think about it, and as had conversations and with different businesses and organizations over the past like 15 years, it's actually cool, outside of like the teenagers, a lot of people want to be, around this, and they want to know more about it. And so it's for the most part, it's an easy sell, like when we're talking about sharing, these images and these stories of these artists, because people want to know. There's a lot of intrigue around it. There's still a lot of mystery around it, and people just don't have access, from other spaces where they can go and get the information. And so, I mean, I know there are other organizations that have a tougher sell to, to get their programming across, because it might not resonate, or might not have the cachet that what we're offering does. But I still find it very interesting when institutions open their doors up to us, and that maybe that's just a byproduct of, for many years, it not being like that. There weren't any galleries that wanted to show us. There weren't any places that would let us, hang our work, or there weren't many forums that were accepting of the fact that, this is a new form of art that's really evolving in the moment, and we should be, paying attention to it. But I think that we've kind of turned the corner on that. And, for us, I'm saying, like, over the last 5 years, we've really seen this general, public reception of what it is that we're presenting, in a way that I don't think we saw before.
Yeah, I see, and thank you, because as I see parallels, that made me think, like, it's kind of a sticking at it sort of thing where, I rally, I get on the soapbox. I can't tell you what type of soap it is, but I get on a soapbox really advocating for sort of this as an art form, storytelling. It can be audio drama. It can be all of these different things, podcasting as a whole. And, it's two things that are right now. It's like everyone thinks they can do it. And then, it's like, that's not quite true. But then when it comes to those funding dollars, that pitch and that conversation, it's, well, what you do is this. It's not what I do. That's not what a lot of people are doing. Like, this person is doing an audio drama. That's theater. It's not on a stage, but it's actors. It's a play, being written. Or, you know, I haven't used it as much, but other people that listen to it and see sort of this hash of interviews and this archive of interviews, this is anthropological work. But it's like, oh no, it's just you talking. It's like, so it's trying to get it over and show that value while doing it and sticking with it and engaging in all of the rigors of making sort of the work. So hearing that, it's like, oh yeah, like it's much better now for you. So talk a bit about, you have these things that are connected. And I was touching on this a little bit earlier about maybe the curation for me is
I just wanted to jump back because you had asked about process. You had asked about, kind of like inspirations and for me, a lot of it, and I referenced, the idea, right? But the idea always centers around a story, and just like what you just said for yourself, like we're really in the space of storytelling. And for me, it's always about, what are the important stories that need to be told that people are not talking about right now, right? I mean, you have any number of outlets covering a particular current event that's always happening, but from the perspective of a cultural anthropologist, or even I refer to myself as a subcultural anthropologist to a certain degree, because most of the stuff that I'm still writing about is kind of like below the radar still. But even within that, like, what are the important stories? Who are the important actors in these histories that people aren't talking about? Because those are the stories that I want to tell, whether through a mural, whether through an article, whether through an exhibit, or even in song. I'm saying I want to bring that into the conversation. And so much of what we do now is, what you're doing is recording oral histories, even though that's in this kind of like interview format, like, the people podcasting, but, you're recording oral histories. You're, for many of the people that you're interviewing, you probably have not been interviewed multiple times in their lives. I'm saying? You're putting an hour or more towards like uncovering who they are, the work that they're doing, and why it's important. And I feel, and you probably feel like a passion, you have a passion for that, much in the same way that I have a passion for, feeling that like each one of these people that were painting murals in the city for the last 30 years should have their voices heard, should have their stories told. And the graffiti artists, in the same token. So I find a lot of my inspiration for that stuff comes from, looking at things and posing questions to myself and being like, well, who did this? Why did they do it? How did they do it? Once we can start answering those, then we start to formulate these stories that we can start to share with people. And that's been a huge driving force for me for the last 10 or 15 years.
That's huge. And you're right. It's one of those things where, I had a chance to interview someone who, he's like, look, I'm in my late 70s, and we were talking about sort of his journey as in film and in media and in creativity and in the work he was doing. And, I'm like, and I really admire his work, right? And his sort of history. And he was like, man, I'm really privileged to be on your podcast. And I was just like, oh man. And he's like, people are actually observing. He's like, you're outside of my demo, like you wouldn't have been around in my heyday. And he started interviewing me and trying to understand that sort of context and understand like, how would you, someone who wasn't around for a lot of the stuff I was doing, how do you now have nostalgia for something you weren't around for? And we're engaging like in a really interesting conversation. And this is a ham-fisted segue, but I think you're going to like it. Technology made that conversation happen, made that branch of storytelling happen. So for you, could you speak on like the work that you're involved in and how technology plays a role in it? And how do you see it continually playing a role in it as we move along, as we matriculate along?
For sure. When we started painting murals, in the early 2000s, we were really in a learn as we go process. Like how do we get how do we access walls heights without like bringing in scaffolding and all of these things. And so we started like experimenting with things, and I think we were the first ones in the city to bring like hydraulic lifts into use to access buildings instead of putting full scaffolding on it, and even utilizing things like projectors for placement as opposed to spending days and days and days producing a grid on a wall, right? We would come up with our artwork, and then we would get it and project it on the wall and get it to where we wanted, in order to make the work faster, right? And as we were doing, kind of implementing things like that, and we were kind of like sharing and showing with other muralists, we started thinking about other ways that we could, extend the experience of what we were doing. And in 2015, that meant like, tapping into the use of augmented reality and image recognition, kind of applications that were available. And through that, we started making what we called living murals. So there would be obviously static images on the wall, but using your mobile device, you could scan and find hidden content. And with that, we created the first interactive mural in the United States with the Living Timeline Paul Robeson mural, which allowed you to scan the history pods that we had painted on the wall and get video content onto your phone that would extend, the story. It would give you a little bit more context of the scene that we were painting. And we ended up doing that with a number of murals over a span of a couple of years, and really bringing into it. And this was not even using any sort of like animation or something. Some of the stuff that's being used now, but just kind of using it as as a tool to bring additional information, additional content into the experience for the viewers. That coupled with like QR codes now and things of that nature, which makes it a lot easier to like kind of give people a little bit of extra stuff when you're doing it, has been really kind of groundbreaking for us, because now not only are we painting an image, but now we can, with the Paul Robeson mural, we painted the mural, but then we also put artists in the recording studio to record original music, and we had videographers working to take archival footage and weave them into new compositions. And so through all of that, we are finding ways to tap into broader artistry and bring that into something that people, historically have considered, very static, right? Once the murals paint, that we're going to have, this mural that's being painted, and that's just it. Now people are engaging with it, and they're offering, different kind of takes on, what their favorite part was. Some people, we painted the mural, people love the mural, but some people love the songs that were attached to the mural, and they're like, oh, this is amazing, I want to download this, or I want to have this, so I can listen to it. And that's been a really great experience. And we went on to do a number of murals over a 3-4 year period, where we were really creating these different kind of dynamics for like what you could expect out of public art, right? It wasn't just this thing where you walk by and be like, oh, that's pretty. Now it's like, oh, I have to stop and I need to go further into this, because I want to know exactly why he's in this position and what he's doing, and I think that's something that's, really, really, a blessing for creating in this time, right? Because there's so much happening. There's so many things that are changing, even on like a month-to-month basis in terms of technology, that how you can apply it and how you can put it forward to things that you're doing is, it's almost, there's no end to it. So we just like the idea of adapting to, new things, new technologies that people are engaging with, and finding ways extend that experience for them when they're looking at a piece of work that we're bringing into the community.
That's great. And it's great to hear how, and like, I really like when you're able to experience, something creatively, and then you're able to get a bit more. Like I make it, in my head, it plays similar to when I watch maybe the fictionalized version of something, and then I watch the sort of documentary version, and then I maybe read the book, and it's like, oh, a full picture is forming. The closest thing that I can think of in my head is when, maybe when you get like you watch a movie and it's like, here's the serialized companion piece, here's the book that goes along with it, or here's the fictionalized version and the documentary and sort of all of these interviews that are related to it, and you get the full scope. And in this, it's like back in the day, and I'm sure you'll relate to this. Remember when they had the official like soundtrack to a movie? It's almost like that, but for sort of the street art or the work that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just like, oh, songs inspired by.
Yeah, it is very, very much like that because when you're starting to create, the project we're working on now, the Humanity Wall documentary is something that we're looking at in that way, where yes, we're working on recreating or reimagining a mural that was painted 32 years ago with the original artist. There's 32 years of history with this wall, photographs and things of that nature. And then because we're doing a documentary, we wanted to think about like how we were going to score it. And so we are literally right now, compiling a soundtrack that is, all DC music of the era that will then be put out like on a vinyl record, with the same branding and be tied in closely with the final documentary project, standalone book, with all of that material. And so these are ways that we can extend the content and extend the experience for people who might not, have ever even walked up and seen the mural, but yeah, in this way, it's not just we're just going to repaint the mural. We're going to document the whole process. We're going to edit it for you. We're going to have interviews with the artist. We're going to share all of this stuff with you so that you then have the full story, right? And it's not left up to question. And I think a lot of times, with the things that when we create art, sometimes it's just out there, right? And people are like, well, where did this come from? Why is this here? As with my mentor who started the DC Murals project many years ago, she had the question, who painted this? And why? Why is it here? So we like to at this point, start to offer up as many answers to questions or accessible doors for people to get in and learn about it as possible.
That's great. And, points to you because you just knocked out one of my questions. So shout out to you. You're doing my job for me. So appreciate you on that. And yeah, that it's a package. Like you want the full, sort of experience. So it's close to the experience, the more fleshed out version of it. And I love that. That sounds like really cool. And that's, it seems like it's almost in some ways for folks that are like, I guess fans of it from a cultural standpoint, from an artist standpoint, from an anthropological standpoint, it feels like low hanging fruit, but then it feels like so next level because people aren't really going that extra length to say, you know what, this is actually the arc and the trajectory here, not just an anniversary thing. It's like, no, we're revisiting this and we're bringing it back and we're doing it in this way. We now have the opportunity and the technology to bring it up to this level, which, as you mentioned 30 plus years ago, those things weren't there. The resources weren't there. So now, in a way of preserving culture and extending culture, we're here now.
Yeah, and I have the conversation with many of the folks who are like, "Oh, you should come and put an exhibit in here, or you should do a show like this." And I was like, "We can absolutely do that, as long as we can also do a book, as long as we can also do like a standalone website, because." After we have these 30 days or whatever in your gallery, then all that stuff just goes away. Or what happens to it after that, right? But when you start to put some of these other pieces into play, that you make sure that there's access to the story beyond those 30 days and beyond the effort that you're going to put into, putting that on for 30 days. I mean, when I told the folks that I was doing the documentary, they were like, "Oh, that's going to be great." I was like, "Yeah, and there's going to be a book. And there's going to be, there's going to be all of this other stuff." And they're like, "How are you going to do that?" And I was like, "Well, if I'm going to go through the process of doing the documentary, I might as well have the stuff here for a book. I'm going to do all the writing. I'm going to have all the collateral. I'm going to do a book." Yeah. It's just a no-brainer. They were like, "Well, if you have the documentary, why would you do a book?" I was like, "Well, sometimes people like to flip through a book and look at pictures, like as opposed to they're, watching it on the screen." And there, for me, like I've been making as much of the stuff as I can interactive. So just in the same way that we took the murals and we put embedded content in there. I'm putting embedded content in the book also, right? Where you can scan on the book and you can get a video popping up on your screen that will give you more context to the passage you're reading, or additional images that's related to the artist that you're looking at, because you can only put so much on a page, right? And so in that way, I think we're trying to redefine like how people are absorbing this media and giving it to them in multiple ways and multiple versions. I think it helps because everybody accesses information differently.
Yeah, and I think it's two things. Before moving to this last question, it's two things that I think about with it. One, I think about my own content, and I find that I'm coming up on 800 interviews, right? And yeah, and
That's no joke.
yeah, well, thank you. And it's a thing where you're like, oh yeah, well, I've interviewed this person. And it's like, oh well, I was like, no, you haven't listened to this when I talk to sponsors or so on, potential sponsors. You should reach out to this person. Did the interview. Here it is right here. Happy to do it again, but here's the interview right here. And when I talk with guests, especially when it's like museums and so on, institutions, I'm like, where's this going to live at in addition to where it's living at here? Being able to extend it. This is part of the story that you guys are telling. I'm just helping facilitate it. And another thing that comes to mind, this is more pop culture oriented, but I think of those collector's edition DVDs. I need the full scope. I need the companion piece. One of my favorite gifts, I got like RoboCop steel case with the booklet and the set photos. I'm like, we out here. This is great. Or even video game. People always would joke about the new Madden is out, new in quotation, because it's just the same game. And they might change the jersey or something here and there, but it's essentially the same game. But I think you're thinking of a lifespan, like where does this extend outside of folks that can come there and see this mural in person? Can they take this piece with them? Can this experience continue and extend?
Yeah, totally. And knowing as much as I do in terms of like how quickly these things can go away, like in terms of like, murals just disappear off the street, so yeah, you have a picture of it, what I'm saying? That's a great start, but how much more can you have in the kind of like in the archives, what I'm saying, to support that? And so as we're going forward and whatever we're doing, we're complete documentation behind the scenes, everything. There's camera shooting, we're recording everything. And in that way, we're going to, make it, make those things, like more accessible to folks. And when I'm a fan of something, I think like you just referenced, like when I'm a fan of something, I want to know all of it. You know what I'm saying? I want to know how it was made. I want to know what mistakes were made. I want to know like, all of that stuff. So, as I'm creating content, I'm thinking about that, and I know that for things that I love, I'm assembling all of those pieces that way.
So, and thank you. So when it comes to assemblaging, I want to talk about this sort of last question as it relates to the East, the rise of public murals in east of the river. What was the inspiration behind it? And I see that it had the accompanying book or has an accompanying book as well. So talk a bit about that as we close out the portion.
For sure. So again, just to reference my mentor, Dr. Perry Frank, when I first started to become conscious of the murals that were around in the city, and she started to really educate me towards, who the artists were that created them. She told me, and it didn't register with me then, but she told me, she's like, this all starts in Chicago. You got to go back to Chicago. And I didn't really understand what she meant until, we started along this pathway to the East. And I was trying to create a timeline of the earliest murals east of the river. And again, she brought back my attention back. She's like, you really need to go back to Chicago before you start talking about this. And so, and what she meant is that, and one of the reasons why I'm sorry, let me backtrack just a little bit, because the question you ask is why. A lot of people love murals. They have no clue where they came from. In the last 10, 15 years, it seems like they just came out of nowhere. But the truth of the matter is that the timeline of murals evolving in the United States can be traced back, and it can be traced back to the summer of 1967 in Chicago. And that's when a group of artists called the Organization for Black American Culture brought out the first street mural in Chicago, in West Side Chicago. That wall essentially sparked off what we know as the contemporary movement. From 67 till now is a gradual evolution of that tradition that came out of Chicago. That mural, inspired more than 500 kind of response murals from various parts of the United States and around the world. And over the course of 2 decades, inspired artists to go out and take their artwork out of the studio, out of the gallery, and onto the streets. When I started researching it, that wall in particular, it pointed me in a very interesting direction. It pointed me back to Howard University, and in the conversations that were happening between Elaine Locke and Herring in the art department in Howard University's kind of formative, 19th century, 20th century rather years, like, talking like 1930 through like the 1950s, where there was this real kind of cultural battle between the art department and the philosophy department. Elaine Locke was of the thought that there needed to be a African-American identity distinctive in visual arts that set it apart from the European traditions. Herring thought that, art needed to be good and needed to be good by X standards. And so there was this kind of fight happening within that department. There was a call really that was being sent out to Black artists to really respond back to and create what was going to be the visual identity of Black Americans. And in my research, what I found was the call was answered by the creation of public murals. We're talking about Black figurative art on the streets, patterning, iconography, things that were not in the lexicon of American visual arts prior, right, started to come into the public space. And there's a lot of reasons for how it happened. I mean, obviously there was just this intense fight for racial equality in the late 60s that really was kind of pushing all of these things to the forefront. But when it spilled out onto the streets, that's when we really started to see a deep impact in the reception of this kind of work. And it echoed here to Washington, D.C., from Chicago here within the first summer. And in the research that we presented in the To the East book, you'll see, the very first mural painted in Washington, D.C. that we've been able to kind of find evidence of. That was painted by Pride Inc., which was Marion Barry's organization during their pilot summer youth employment program. We found early murals painted at the Anacostia Community Museum in Southeast, also in 67. And then we see, how, murals then became, a fixture in the city, downtown first, and then throughout the neighborhoods. But one thing that we noted was, even though that this artwork was coming from this very specific place in terms of who had been creating it and why it had been created, by the time we got to the end of the 70s, we weren't really seeing those murals anymore. We were seeing more decorative murals, or corporate art murals, art for art's sake, not really like anything with any sort of identity or any sort of messaging to it. And there was a very small group of artists in Washington, D.C. that were operating that realized that there was really no murals happening east of the river. There was really none of this stuff was being brought over to the community where it should be, having the most impact. And so the To the East story is really about just that evolution of public murals in that space and how these culture workers then took that practice and cemented it into the east side of the city. particularly artists like Alexander Madison Jr., Big Al Carter, Cheryl Foster, Rick Freeman, Roger Turner. And these artists are master level fine artists. Even in their early years, they were very, very, very good, for, being out on the side of a building painting with like house paint, they're creating these dynamic murals in the center of the community that are really reinforcing cultural identity and cultural messaging in a time, for the most part, that the city was going through it, and that, the fact that you would have people out working with large groups of kids to create these murals still seemed pretty unique and new. And so it was very important for me to dive as deep as I could into that story and to present it through images in the gallery, but then also through the book. And one of the things that kind of surprised me, like I had never seen anybody make the through line, between, kind of this call for a distinct, identity, a Black identity in the visual arts, and the immersion of murals, because it was to me, it seemed very, very clear that this is how it happened. And I don't want to get bogged down into the details, and I think I'd let you know that if you wanted to check it out, there's a link at the dcmuralsproject.org website where you can just download the PDFs. But there are a lot of characters that play into the whole story, how they overlap and how they all kind of coincide, circulating around Howard University for the better part of like 3 or 4 decades, and really kind of creating the template for what we know as public art today.
That's great. And I'll absolutely include that in the show notes because, why not? And yeah, because I was typing it in and I was like, all right, I'm just going to find this, put it in the show notes at my own pace. But thank you. It's important, I think, to be able to cover and document sort of the history of why things are the way they are and why, sort of art is where it's at. Like people have questions, and being able to have some sort of, like the history and the background from it, because I'm very, very curious and I'm very protective of sort of like culture and where it goes, because as we go further along, things are suppressed, things are changed, and you start losing the meaning behind certain things. So, the work that it seems that you're very attached to and very into is working to combat that through, sort of murals and through the sort of documenting of that work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that tradition is the thing that we are missing a lot of, particularly as the murals have become more popular. Mm-hmm. That the reasoning for them and kind of the thematic properties of them have shifted and changed in such a way that people are just like, oh, it's murals, it's great. Well, not every mural is good for a community, and I mean, going, I have conversations with folks like they're like, oh, gotta talk about funding, right? Like, oh, Corey, this company will pay you X amount of dollars to paint, a mural over here. Well, yeah, but they want me to paint a Heineken mural, and they want me to paint it in the, in the community that's, that has like 4 liquor stores, and we're not doing that, sometimes you have to, kind of like look at, the things and make a discernible, a discernible decision of whether or not this is going to be something that's good for you, good for the community, whatever have you. So we have a lot of that. People will come to me all the time and be like, oh, can you paint this? And I know the neighborhoods that I'm in, and I know the people that are in the neighborhood, and I know that this is not something that they're going to want to look at, every day of the year. For me, murals take up such key spaces in a community that you have to really, really, really curate those with the thought of what it's going to do to the face of the community. So, and I feel that way. The stories of the artists that really held that tradition to heart, that brought the great works that we know of in the city to life, their legacy and their work deserves that kind of scrutiny And if I'm going to continue the tradition in terms of bringing work into the community or telling the stories, then I'm going to put that much, towards it, making sure that we get it right.
And that's and I'm glad you cooked right there, because that's a good spot for us to kind of close out on the real portion of the interview. So I got 3 rapid fire questions for you, and you listen to a pod, you know how it goes. Don't overthink these questions. All right, here's the first one. In this scenario, money is not an object. I know we've been talking about funding in this podcast. Money is not an object here. Blank checks, brother. So what is the vacation destination you would go to? If money's no object, where do you want to go?
Money's no object. I have a lot of friends and family in Thailand, and I've spent a fair amount of time there over the last 10 years. I would say Thailand. However, I'm going to say that I would love to go and spend time in Africa and just travel around, meet people, learn. Because that's one space where I've just never, my feet have never touched the soil, and I would love for that to be that would be my dream vacation.
That's a great answer. It's a huge space. Like I've been thinking, I've only been out of this country once, and it was on a cruise. And I was like, that barely counts. And I'm like, look, I can't fade it. Like I'm 6'4", right? So the prospect of being on a plane for a long time is terrifying to me. Like my knees, I feel it already in my knees. But thinking of this trip to Japan, because I've been studying Japanese for like the last 240 days, and I just want to go there. I think I'll be a hit. I don't know. We'll see.
I think you're preparing. I mean, you're studying. Hey, listen, all you need is the right deal, you know what I'm saying? And then you're flying private jet there, right? So you don't have to worry about your needs.
This is true. Here's the next one. This is the destination based again. If you were stranded on a desert island, I don't know where desert islands are at. what are 3 items that you got to have with you?
3 items that I have to have with me on a deserted island. If we're talking strictly survival, I'm going to need some sort of water purification apparatus.
Practical.
Yeah. I'm going to need a boat. I'm going to need a boat.
That's cheating, but go on.
I mean, you said 3 things,
okay.
3 things. And I'm going to need to just have, a little photo album of my peoples, I guess, you know what I'm saying? Something to look at, pictures of the loved ones, I don't know if I can only have 1 picture, but, I think I'll be.
It's like that thing of like, yeah. This is what I'm doing it for. Okay. I got to get back.
Right. You need that inspiration to keep hold it together.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll find my own volleyball or something, coconut. I'll draw the face on. I have some friends.
That's good. I'm just spearfishing, just chucking and dragging, because you gotta maintain this mass. So here's the last one. Since you're, musically inclined, you're a musician, you're in that space. What is your theme song? You've mentioned musicians during this pod as well. So, I definitely want to get that take. What is your theme song? If you had one. Not some of us don't.
So theme song will definitely change depending on the season, but I will say the longest running theme song for me has been All Heads Realize by Smith & Wesson.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, depending on the season, it could be, Cold as Ice by MOP. It could be Success by Joe. You know what I'm saying? Like, these are things that are reoccurring like in my head playlists, and sometimes it'll be some softer stuff, but to be honest, like All Heads Realize for many, many years, that wake up song.
I dig it. That's good. So that's kind of it for the pod. For the real questions and the fake questions, as people call it. Some people call it the BS questions. I just say they're rapid fire questions. So there's 2 things. One, thank you for coming onto the podcast and spending some time. We've made it happen. And 2, I want to invite and encourage you to share with the listeners where they can follow you, where they can follow your work, social media, website, all of that good stuff. The floor is yours.
For sure. You can follow me on all platforms at Rock Creek Lee, ROCK Creeklee. You can find me on all digital streaming platforms under that name. If you want to follow some of the work we're doing with DC Murals, you can follow that at dcmuralsproject.org. If you want to follow what we're doing with the Humanity Wall, follow us or check out thehumanitywall.com.
Well, there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Corey Lee Stowers for coming on to the podcast and spinning a yarn with me. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.